Welcome, everybody. I hope your week has been going well. I'm excited to explore Esther today with you tonight. This is going to be the last part of our 5-part series. And what I'm going to try to do is go into Esther and who she was and figure out how we can channel her qualities. And then at the end, I'd like to just review each woman that we learned about a little bit, just to recap. And then I'm going to give everyone a chance to share anything you've gained from the series, any questions you want to pose, any comments that you have. I would definitely love to hear your feedback. So last time, about 2 weeks ago, we ended talking about Ruth and how she was someone who really dedicated herself to the service of Hashem and really displayed a lot of joy and happiness in doing that. And over, we see in Ruth's story that she kept being asked why she was so devoted to serving Hashem, even though she came from a royal place where she didn't have to care and worry for much. And she kept saying that she loves Hashem and she loves the Torah, and that's what drove her to do that. So we talked about trying to channel joy within our life and figuring out also how we can play to our strengths to be able to connect with ourselves and serve Hashem and improve our relationships. So tonight, we're going to talk about Esther, who is in the story of Purim. I know that's a little bit definitely away, not coming up, but Esther has a lot of really interesting things about her. What I'd like to focus on is really addressing her fear and bravery and hiddenness and this really incredible sort of mysterious way of really playing the role that she was meant to play and serving Hashem. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background as usual. There is a pasuk in Devorah that says, Va'anochi haster astir panai bayom hahu al hara'a asher asa ki pana el Elohim acherim. Yet I will keep my countenance hidden on that day because of all the evil that they have done in turning to other gods. So the Talmud in Chulin explains that this pasuk in Devarim, in the Torah, hints to Esther and the Purim story, although it happened many years afterwards. And it alludes to this hiddenness and despair that's associated with the story. When it says about serving idols, it's talking about how Bnei Israel, during the time of the Purim story, specifically by the feast of Achashverosh, they turned away from Hashem and they chose to serve other gods. And their punishment was really having Hashem, so to speak, turn his face away from them. And this really connects to the whole theme of the Purim story, which is the fact that Hashem is hidden from us. Now, what we have to understand is that that's a reality that we experience now. As long as we're in Galus, as long as we experience exile and we're not in the land, the Mashiach hasn't come, we experience Hashem in a hidden way. Anochi haster astir panai. Hashem literally hides his face from us. So we're not able to see things in a clear way. And the Purim story is really what highlights this. And what it tries to teach us is how to find Hashem even when he doesn't rule over us in such a revealed way. There's a famous fact about the story of Purim that it doesn't mention God's name anywhere in the story. So you can almost read it and think, oh, it's, all these events that happened to be, and all of it was a coincidence. And yet you can see when you string it all together, each detail, that everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to lead to Bnei Israel being redeemed and being victorious. So we're not going to focus on that theme, but just to give some background. So who is Esther in this story? And what role does she play? What can we learn from her? And how can we try to sort of channel who she was? So in Perek Beis of the Megillah, again, a little bit of background. It says, sometime afterward, when the king Achashverosh subsided from being angry, because Vashti, who was the queen at the time, would not come to his party, and he was very insulted, and he felt like she insulted him and was not loyal to him in front of the people. And when his anger subsided a little bit, he thought about Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. And the pasuk says, the king's servants who were attending to him said, you know what? It's time to replace the queen. Let us find beautiful young girls in Shushan, and we'll bring them to you, and we'll assemble all of them under the supervision of Haggai, who was the king's sort of, not sure like what the best term is, but sort of help beautify the women and make sure they were up to par. And he was their sort of guardian. He would give them all these cosmetics and things. So the king's attendant said, let us bring a bunch of ladies and we'll line them up and you'll get to choose a new queen. And we'll choose someone to be ruling instead of Vashti. And Achashverosh really liked the proposal and he acted upon it. And then the pasuk says, it introduces to us that in Shushan, there lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai. He was the son of Yair ben Shimi ben Kish ish Yemini, a man from the Shevet, the tribe of Binyamin. And he had been exiled, Kish had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into the Galus, along with King Yechaniah of Yehuda, which had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, of Bavel. And Mordechai was a foster father to Hadassah, who was Esther. It says that she was his uncle's daughter. It's possible that she was his niece. She didn't have a father or a mother, and she was beautiful, the pasuk says. And when her father and her mother died, Mordechai adopted her as his own daughter. And the next psukim say, when the king's order was proclaimed, many girls were assembled in the fortress of Shushan under the supervision of Haggai. And Esther also was taken into the king's palace under his supervision. And the girl pleased him, and she won his favor. And so he quickly made her up, made sure she was up to par, as well as with 7 other maidens who were going to serve her and help her while she was in the palace. And he treated her with a lot of kindness and respect. That's what the pasuk says. And then it says, Lo hegida Esther es ama ve'es moladeta ki Mordechai tziva aleha asher lo tagid. That when Esther entered into the palace, she did not reveal her identity, her people, where she came from, for Mordechai told her not to. First part where we see that Esther already came in with this sort of mysterious hidden nature. She already from the beginning hid who she was and where she came from. So a little bit more about that. First of all, Esther is called by 2 names, Esther and Hadassah. Hadass is also a myrtle. The Talmud in Megillah explains that myrtle leaves are sweet smelling and they're used as a metaphor to describe righteous people, which is interesting. Esther comes from the root of Hester, just like we talked about before, that Hashem rules over us in a hidden way, because she herself kept her words hidden. It's also similar to the Persian word Estaher, which means moon, which was a reference to her beauty. The nations would look to her and say that she's beautiful like the moon. She's hidden. She's always sort of around. You don't necessarily see her in a bright and external way like the sun, but she's really beautiful. So what I want you to start thinking about as we go through this is how can we translate this quality of hiddenness and mystery into our lives in a good way, in a positive way. I think it's really interesting to see over and over again the power of hiding. It's how can we use that in a positive way? Some more facts that are interesting. Esther is Mordechai's cousin. She comes from the tribe of Binyamin, who was the son of Rachel. And it says that both Rachel and Esther are described to be beautiful. And a Gemara in Megillah says that Esther is considered to be one of the 4 beauties of the world. Fascinating. Silence and the ability to keep something hidden is a root quality of Esther. She made sure, again, not to share her identity with Achashverosh because Mordechai asked her not to. And this is what led up to the plan to be able to rescind his decree to destroy the Jewish people. This is the very beginning of that. It's the first sort of detail that we see happen. Now, to give some context, there's many reasons why it was probably really hard for Esther to live in the palace and be married to the king. and be there and sort of be the catalyst for our redemption. Mordechai said, could it be that this righteous woman should be married to such a despicable man? Achashverosh was not a great guy. There's a lot of, sort of jokes and comments that go around about him when the story of Purim comes, about the way that he acted. He was very foolish, just his presence. And she had to be with him in the palace during all this time. And she was married to Mordechai. She was afraid that her identity would be revealed. And she really was alone. She was in the palace surrounded by people that she had to stay hidden from. But still, she kept it all a secret. And again, you're going to see in the story, it's going to lead to saving the Jewish people. And I think that we can start to think about the power of keeping something hidden. Is like, I think, especially nowadays, to bring it to a kind of a real perspective, we share a lot, and sharing is awesome. But I think we live in a time where a lot of things end up being public messages. And there is a power to keeping things hidden. And that's within your relationship to yourself. Is like, start to think about what are even like your qualities, things about you, or even mitzvos that you perform that you can possibly bring a little bit of hiddenness to it, because there's a lot of power in keeping it sort of under wraps. It takes away a lot of pressure, which I'm gonna get to. And this is really, it's a skill. It's not just a result of being compassionate or humble or modest. It's really, when you keep something hidden, the statement that you're making is that you're putting yourself aside for a greater goal. You're trying to actually be intentional and accomplish something, not through people knowing about it. I have a direct quote from the Jewish Pathway series, which says, when one refuses to reveal private information, it seems that she is willing to let a higher authority take control of events and not take an active role in changing the course of history, which means that sometimes concealing something is actually a way to surrender to Hashem by saying, it's not necessarily my job. By keeping this hidden, I'm letting go of control that I want to have over a situation. And I'm going to choose not to take an active role because maybe things are going to happen the way they're supposed to happen. Now, different situations call for different things. And I think obviously we have to figure out, okay, what does this call for? But sometimes, again, keeping something hidden that you know about could really be a statement that you're making, that you're willing to step back from something. Some more things that we see about Esther and her modesty, that she kept her identity hidden while pleasing King Ahasuerus and fulfilling the will of Hashem. It's also seen that because she accepts Mordechai's instructions through every step of the way, she's really sort of living a double life, which we can imagine being really difficult. She's in the palace. She has to obey the king's orders. She's with him. She's trying to sort of build a rep and be there. At the same time, she's meeting Mordechai outside. He's giving her instructions. He's telling her what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do. And every step of the way, she's doing that. And it's not for her own benefit. It's for the Jewish people. Something that I always like to point out about her is that even though we know at the end of the story that the Jewish people got to celebrate being victorious and not being destroyed, which is a huge cause for celebration, it says that Esther actually remained in the palace and had to continue living there, being with Ahasuerus and being part of the palace. So it's almost, I always picture it as, looking through a window and her looking down at the people, sort of cheering and moving on in crowds, and she's still there. And it really makes it clear that, first of all, just imagine how difficult it was for her to make such a sacrifice. But also, she was doing what she was doing for the sake of the Jewish people. She put herself aside in order to ensure their survival. And it's incredible. Something that we also see from her is that she was scared while she was doing that. And that's what I want to emphasize too, is like the fear is so real. It doesn't mean that she gave up and decided not to move forward and do what she was sort of meant to do, but the fear was very much there. It also says about her that she did not want any position of royalty or public acknowledgement. And she didn't ask much of King Ahasuerus to do for her. She sort of like stayed quiet, stayed on the side. She did whatever Haggai asked her to do in order to make herself beautiful. And something that's said about her is that she had this sort of chen, a grace, a inner beauty that shone outwards. And I think that also sort of hints to our idea of modesty, of tznius, because our focus is to try to complement what's inside with the outside, rather than having the external be something that's without limit, because it makes us forget who we are, what we're trying to do. And Esther really displayed this because she sort of took like a very quiet role in the palace and kept her identity hidden. But it says that she had this inner beauty that you could just experience when you were in the room with her, which is incredible. And again, it says that her goal was to look down, listen to Mordechai, and save the Jewish people. Another lesson is, I think that we can also reflect on what's behind the things that we're doing. Is it because we want people to see it and to compliment us, to praise us? Do we want recognition? Do we want to feel high in status? Do we want to feel important? What's the intention behind things that we're doing? Now, with that being said, I think it's important to recognize, like, praise is important. We have to acknowledge the things that we're doing and acknowledge it within each other. But sometimes we lose track of why we're doing that thing, and it becomes all about how people are looking at us. So Esther is also teaching us to start to internalize again, start to look within, start to think about your intention. Why are you doing the thing that you're doing? What's really the reason? And is it the right one? That's really the question. I think it's also cool to bring in trying to do something for yourself. And I talked about this in the other shiurim as well, but doing something in private, like something that's just for you, whether it's a specific tefillah that you want to say, or any other mitzvah, or journaling, or even just taking time to think and doing something that's only for you, can also really help you be better in other areas in your life. And there's something special about that. There's something special about doing a mitzvah in private and holding back from saying something you shouldn't, but not advertising that, or just thinking like, nobody else has to know about this thing. This is my own private thing. And it's sort of very pure and sincere. And it takes away that pressure of everybody looking and judging. And it's just you trying to evaluate your intention. Part 2 of Esther is all about bravery and making the right choices. There's a quote that I found that said, bravery is not being afraid to be afraid. So I think bravery is really an interesting thing. And sometimes we think that bravery and fear are opposites, like they don't belong. But I personally think that in order to be brave, you have to feel scared. So, and that's exactly what we see from Esther and the things that she did. And what I'm going to try to highlight now is that she wasn't so gung-ho and ready to save the Jewish people right from the start. She had a lot of fear, and she wasn't sure that she was up for the job. So it says that she spent months in the palace hiding who she was, not knowing what was going to happen in the future. And Mordechai realized that Hashem must have set this up so that she could facilitate some kind of salvation for the Jews. So then Mordechai becomes aware, obviously I'm skipping around the story, of the decree that was made against the Jews by the king that inspired Haman to destroy every man, woman, and child. So Mordechai ripped his clothes, he mourned in the streets, and Esther was confused by his behavior. She was shaken, and she asked him, like, explain to me what's going on here. And Mordechai responds to Esther, and he tells her, Haman is actually a descendant of the nation of Amalek, and he poses a very serious threat to the Jewish people. He then requests that she goes to the king to beg for the decree to be taken away. And here are the psukim that describe the conversation. When Esther's maidens came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordechai to wear so he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. So Esther summoned Hasach, one of the servants of the king who was appointed to serve her, and she sent him to Mordechai to learn what was going on. So Hasach goes out to Mordechai in the city square in front of the palace gate. And Mordechai tells him everything and all about the money that Haman offered to pay into the royal treasury in order for the Jews to be destroyed. He also gave him the written text of the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. And he begged him, he said, show this to Esther and tell her that she has to go to the king and plead with him for her and her people to survive. When Hasach came and delivered Mordechai's message to Esther, here's what she told him. All of the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him, may he live. I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. Meaning, you don't just go in to the king, to his inner chamber, march in and make a request. That's not how it works. If you don't have a really good reason to be there, then that's the end of you. And she explained, I haven't been in his inner chamber in 30 days. So if I just go in there, who knows what's going to happen? When Mordechai was told what Esther had said, he had a message delivered to her. And he said, do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. Ki im hacharesh tacharishi, if you keep silent, ba'es hazos, in this crisis, during this time, ravach ve'hatzala ya'amod laYehudim mimakom acher, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place. At uveis avich tovedu, you and your father's house are going to perish. Umi yodea, I love this part of the pasuk. And who knows? Im la'es hazos higat lamalchus. Perhaps you have attained the royal position in the palace exactly for this purpose, for this position, to be there in that moment in order to save the Jews from this crisis. So there's a lot to be said about that. So then Esther says back to Mordechai, okay, go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan, fast on my behalf, do not eat or drink for 3 days. I and my maidens are going to do the same thing. Then I'm going to go to the king. Once the Jews have fasted and prayed, I'm going to go to the king, even though it's contrary to the law, to what's supposed to be done. V'cha'asher avadati avadati. And if it's meant, if I'm destined to perish, I will perish. So Mordechai goes about the city and he does exactly as Esther commands him. And when Esther hears Mordechai's request originally, she responds with a lot of hesitation because it's really asking her to do something that's very outside of her comfort zone. If you put together what we've said about Esther and her hiddenness and the way that she kept things a secret, what Mordechai is really asking for her is to be assertive, is to do exactly the opposite, is to go into the king's palace and make a request, a big request for a decree to be rescinded. And she states, right, like I said before, anyone who goes in there can be put to death. And she didn't really, also, it says she didn't understand the urgency of the decree because it wasn't going to happen at that point for another 11 months. And she was also really, really scared. So Mordechai also, what he tries to do is point out to her that there is a time to be silent and there is a time to put that aside and overcome in order to act for Hashem and the Jewish people. But what's interesting is that he also says, like, here's a role that I think you're really meant for, but if you don't, I assure you, salvation for the Jewish people will come from somewhere. Hashem's going to save them. So if you choose not to step into that, okay, it's going to happen from somewhere else, but you have a choice. Are you going to step in? Are you going to facilitate that or not? He also told her that there is a special thing about overcoming your nature. And in this situation, speaking up and taking assertive action. And from here, as soon as she says, go fast, okay, I'm going to go, her personality kind of takes a turn and she becomes an initiator, an active leader, a decision maker. And she orders him herself. She commands Mordechai to gather everybody and to have them fast. And we start to see how, okay, she made that choice. She did have that hiddenness about her, and that was her natural way, but she overcame her personality, something that came so naturally to her in order to save the Jewish people. So she pushes away her silence, and she gets her brave face on, and she marches in to see the king, and she gets it to be rescinded. And I think we also see that bravery is not something that necessarily comes naturally to someone, but it doesn't mean that they can't tap into it and act on it. By accepting this challenge, Esther was really putting her life at risk. And she also risked never seeing Mordechai again. So I'm just trying to provide context and like think of this scene and how she felt and what position she was in. And to her, it also says that it was clear that if there's no Jewish nation in the future, there's no point of anything else. Because at the end of the day, as we know, the world was created for us to be able to serve Hashem and to keep his Torah. And at this point in the story, Esther really saw herself as a catalyst for redemption. So she went from being afraid and hesitating to being afraid and still doing it and acting for the nation. One more thing I want to share before we start to wrap this part up is there's a few psukim in a special parak of Tehillim that describe Esther and her feelings as she was coming into the palace. I'm just going to point out a few. Lamnatzeach al Ayeles HaShachar Mizmor LeDavid. To the chief musician upon Ayeles HaShachar. Ayeles HaShachar refers to a star that comes out right before the morning, which is the darkest point in the night, to show that the darkest times come before salvation. And that symbolizes Esther. She was that hidden, secret person behind the scenes working quietly that acted in a really dark time for the Jewish people. The next pasuk says, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani, rachok mishuasi divrei shagasi. And it translates as, my God, why have you forsaken me? So far from my deliverance from the words of my cry. And Esther actually, it says that she said these words, and this was when in the palace, when Hashem's presence left her, because she was actually a prophet. She was a Navi who usually had nevuah. And when she passed by the Avodah Zarah, the idols that were in the palace, suddenly she lost Hashem's presence. So she called out to him, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani, why have you left me? Elokai ekra yomam velo taneh, velayla velo dumiyali. I call out to you by day, but you do not answer. And at night, there is no relief for me. Again, she's in the palace, day in, day out, night after night, acting in secret, not being in a place where she wants to be, not seeing Mordechai, having to be with Achashverosh, being afraid of what was going to happen next. And she feels no relief. Ve'ata kadosh yoshev tehilos Yisrael. And you, Hashem, are holy, and you are with me. So just to show, I think, like the powerful words of, Lama azavtani, Hashem, why have you left me? That's a very real feeling, and especially can come when somebody is afraid of something, going through something difficult and not sure what's going to happen next. It could be a feeling of, God, why have you left me? And what I want to point out about that is that fear is real. And Esther was going through a real time of darkness. And as much as we are happy and rejoice when we get to celebrating Purim, we have to understand this period that happened before that. She lost her prophecy. She was alone. Yet she recognized Hashem and that this was his will and that she gets to step into this special role to save the Jews. And so, again, being afraid, but still recognizing Hashem, no matter how you feel. Esther is really, really kind of still mysterious to me. I think even after the things that we point out, it's still like, we can wonder what, are there more things about her? We don't necessarily know. But I think one thing that is clear is that she showed us that being hidden and doing things, keeping them as a secret and having this hiddenness about you are really incredible traits, and they can help you accomplish things. But it's also important to be able to set aside your natural inclination and overcome that to be able to do the right thing and to accomplish things. And the other thing about being afraid, again, I think that fear is a really strong emotion. I can think of so many situations in my life where fear maybe overrules a little bit, and it's hard to keep it in check and not let it take over. But I'm going to encourage all of you to think also about fear and about when have you been afraid in your life, but you went ahead and you did something anyway, and you were able to move forward. Because that's really what we're trying to do, is like acknowledge that fear is real. It's part of me. It's natural. But how do I still continue to accomplish things within myself? A couple questions for ask yourself for the practical sense. I will send out a document also with all the ask yourself questions from all the women, so you can have that going forward. But here are the questions relating to Esther and who she was. There's 4 of them. I think I add another one each time. Number 1, ask yourself, what's something that you can do in a hidden or private way that's only for you? Whether that's self-care, whether that's a spiritual thing, whether it's both, whatever. What's something you can do in a hidden private way that's only for you? Number 2, how can you acknowledge fear in one area in your life and work on moving forward anyway? Again, how can you acknowledge fear in one area in your life and work on moving forward anyway? Number 3, think about a situation in your life that requires bravery. Try to adopt that trait, even if it does not come naturally to you in some way. Again, think about a situation in your life that requires bravery. Adopt that trait and use it, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. And the last one is number 4. Where do you need to put your natural trait aside in order to get something done? Again, where is an area where you need to overcome something that comes naturally to you in order to get something done? So like Esther, being able to put the hiddenness aside and act for the sake of others or for the sake of Hashem. So that's the end of Esther. I'm going to quickly recap the other women that we talked about, and then I'm going to open it up. I'd really love to hear feedback. And a quick announcement about the feedback part. The Zoom session will not be recorded at that point. So don't be afraid that your whatever you're saying is being recorded. This is a place where you can share your thoughts, honestly. So we started this incredible series by talking about Sarah, and we talked about being strong and adopting her way of putting up boundaries. We asked ourselves how we can put up more boundaries in our life. How can we also accept kindness from Hashem or others? Then we talked about, let's see if I'm going in the right order. I think Chana was next. And we talked about how she embraced emotion and sadness. And we talked about intention and ways where we can try to increase or strengthen our ability to embrace how we feel. We also discussed Devorah, who was during the time of the judges, and how she was this fierce leader who was a people builder. And we asked ourselves, how can we find qualities in other people that we can learn to appreciate? And then we talked about Ruth and her dedication to Hashem. And we asked ourselves, how can we add more joy into the things that we're doing? And of course, with Esther, how can we tap into bravery, hiddenness and bravery, fear and bravery, all at the same time? What's an area in our life where we need a little bit of a bravery boost, so to speak? Another couple of things I want to mention. So I think that, or I hope I should say, that we sort of got the point that these women really show us that we have this incredible power within ourselves, for ourselves, because we talked about this relationship that we have bein adam la'atzmo. That's where everything starts. Between me and me is like looking within and trying to understand myself more, taking a quality from every single woman and trying to channel her in some way going forward. Some phases of our year or of our life may require strength. Some may require bravery. Some may require sadness. Some may require embracing emotion, boundaries, kindness, or maybe all of them at the same time. And what these women show us is that we have what it takes. It's just we have to learn how to recognize that and channel that. And the last thing I'll share before I open up the floor is that I really have tried to emphasize celebrating our success, because that's also where it starts, is recognizing all the incredible things that we do as women, as Jewish women, as mothers, as sisters, as daughters, as teachers, whatever roles we play. We want to make sure that as we're trying to push ourselves in this growth process, we're recognizing along the way the places where we are succeeding, because that's also part of being able to channel who these incredible women were. And with that, I'll also say I am planning to do a part 2 sometime, maybe February, March, that I feel incredibly inspired. And I want to thank all of you, because this series could not have been successful unless all of you attended each time or whenever you were able to, or even listen to the recordings. I feel your presence and I feel your attentiveness and desire to learn, and you just like embrace everything. And it's really been inspiring to me. And I'm going to try to channel these women from the past, but I'm also going to try to channel you, because I think that goes hand in hand. We're here, we're learning together, we're taking time to find intention in our very busy lives. And that's really, really incredible. So if you also happen to have any suggestions, you can always email or you can write in the chat of women that you're interested in knowing about. I can put that into my brain and sort of incorporate it into my research. And if I find enough things to talk about, I can bring that into the next 5 women, because there's definitely more to explore. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to open up the floor. If you want to share feedback, it can be, a woman that you really enjoyed learning about. You can share somewhere where you've channeled one of the women. You can pose a question, share overall how the series was for you. Anything like that will work. So I'm going to